Chodesh Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sotah. We are up to the final two Mishnayot in Masechet Sotah, Perek Tet, Mishnah Yud Daled. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilu Nishmat, Neria ben Tzvitlana, Ranbai, Eliyahu ben Burcha, Israel, Chana bad Miriam, Sason ben Raya, and Yehoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen, and Avdi ben Chaim Lechaim, with the Refuah Shelema, of Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betoch Shah Cholei Israel. The Mishnah lists decrees that were made around the time of the destruction of the Second Temple so that we will mourn over our loss. The Mishnah begins Bipulmos Shel Aspasianos during Vespasian's military campaign against Jerusalem. Now, when the Roman general Vespasian was laying siege to Jerusalem, he received the news that Emperor Nero had died and the Roman Senate had proclaimed him emperor. Vespasian returned to Rome and appointed his son Titus as general in his place. After a few months, Titus succeeded in breaching the city and destroying the temple. This is the event brought down in Masechet Gittin, page 56a and b. The Mishnah refers to the first stage of the siege, which was led by Vespasian. So again, during Vespasian's military campaign against Jerusalem, Gazru al atrot chatanim, the sages decreed a ban on the crowns of grooms. A groom would wear a type of crown on his wedding day, vale aros, and on playing the aros, a type of drum at weddings. Now, as the calamity drew closer, the sages increased the signs of mourning. B'pulmos shel Titus, during Titus's campaign against Jerusalem, Gazru al atrot kalot, they decreed a ban on the crowns of brides. A bride would wear a golden tiara with the design of a city engraved on it. Now, Titus was commander of the Roman army in the final months of the siege. The sages did not ban the bride's crown at the beginning of the siege when Vespasian was the general, because brides should be appealing to their new husbands. Only when the situation grew seriously worse did the sages prohibit even brides to wear their crowns. V'shelo yilamed adam et beno yivanit. And they decreed that a man not teach his son Greek wisdom, a special language of hints and riddles used by the Greeks that was known only to those familiar with it. Now, this decree resulted from an incident that took place when Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, sons of King Alexander Yanai, were fighting each other for the crown. Hyrcanus held Jerusalem while Aristobulus besieged the city. Every day, those inside the city would lower money in a basket over the city wall, and the besiegers would take the money and place lambs in the basket for the 2 daily Tamid offerings. Inside the city, there was an old man who knew the code of Greek wisdom. He used a secret language to communicate the following message to the besiegers: as long as the people inside the city perform the sacrificial service, you will be unable to overcome them because the merit of the service will protect them. The next day, instead of placing a lamb in the pouch as usual, the besiegers sent up a pig so that the sacrificial service would not be carried out. When the pig reached the midpoint of the wall's height, it stuck its hoofs into the wall and the entire Eretz Yisrael shook. At that time, the sages declared, "Cursed be the man who shall raise pigs, and cursed be the man who shall teach his son Greek wisdom." This is how the Rav explains the Mishnah based off the Gemara in Sotah, page 49a. Now, this event occurred long before Titus attacked Jerusalem, but the ban on Greek wisdom was not accepted by the people until Titus's campaign prompted the sages to issue the decree again, as Tosfot explains in his first explanation in Masechet Baba Kama, page 82b. Bapulmos ha'acharon, during the final campaign in which the temple was destroyed, Gazru shelo tetzeh hakala be'apiryon betoch ha'ir, they decreed that a bride may not go out on her canopy within the city. When a bride went from her family's home to her husband's home on her wedding day, she would be surrounded by a decorative canopy made of gold embroidered garments. But our rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and his court, as the Rambam explains in his commentary to the Mishnah, later permitted a bride to go forth in a canopy within the city for the sake of modesty, so that the bride cannot be seen by passerby. And that is the end of Mishnah Yud Daled. We continue now with the final Mishnah in Masechet Sotah, Mishnah Tedvav. This Mishnah continues describing the decline that the Jewish people suffered over the course of history. It names Tanaim who had certain abilities or brought particular blessings to the world, whose levels of greatness in these areas were not reached by anyone else after they died. Mishemet Rabbi Meir balu moshle mashalim. Once Rabbi Meir died, there ceased to be tellers of parables who used parables to explain deep ideas in a simple way. Rabbi Meir's public lectures consisted of 3 parts. 1/3 consisted of halacha, 1/3 agadah, and 1/3 parables. Mishemet ben Azai batu shakdanim. Once Ben Azai died, there ceased to be diligent scholars who studied Torah tirelessly day and night. Ben Azai separated from his wife, although he did not have children, as the Gemara says on page 4b, Masechet Sotah. He explained, what can I do? My soul craves the Torah, as the Rav explains based off the Gemara Yevamot, page 63b. Mishemet ben Zoma Badu Darshanim. Once Ben Zoma died, there ceased to be biblical interpreters who know how to derive laws from verses in the Torah. For example, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah famously declared in Masechet Brachot, chapter 1, Mishnah 5, that he could not convince the other sages that one is biblically obligated to mention Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus of Egypt, every night, until Ben Zoma found a biblical source for this ruling. Mishemet Rabbi Yehoshua Paska Tova Min Haolam. Once Rabbi Yehoshua died, goodness from the government ceased from the world. He was expert in giving advice and refuting heresy. As a result, he was highly regarded by government officials, and he was able to influence them to perform many kindnesses for the Jewish people. So once Rabbi Yehoshua died, goodness from the government ceased from the world. Mishemet Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Once Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel died, Ba Govai veRabut Sarot. Locusts spread and misfortunes increased. Mishemet Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Pasak Osher min HaChachamim. Once Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah died, wealth ceased from the sages. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was so wealthy that his annual Maaser Be'emah consisted of 12,000 calves. Now, but Maaser Be'emah is the 10th of one's newborn animals that one must remove from one's flocks each year and bring as offerings in the temple. And we see, the rabbis explain that he was so wealthy, his annual Maaser Be'emah, his annual 10th of his newborn animals, consisted of 12,000 calves. Mishemet Rabbi Akiva Batal Kevod Torah. Once Rabbi Akiva died, the glory of the Torah ceased, because Rabbi Akiva brought unique glory to the Torah by demonstrating that all its details, even the extra lines that adorn the letters, are meaningful. Now, there are crowns at the top of many letters in a Torah scroll. A crown consists of 3 vertical lines, each of which ends in a round dot. When Moshe Rabbeinu went up to heaven to receive the Torah, he saw Hashem attaching crowns to its letters. Moshe Rabbeinu asked, Master of the universe, why is this necessary? God replied, there is destined to be a man after many generations named Akiva ben Yosef, who will derive heaps upon heaps of laws from each and every line of the crowns, as the Gemara explains in Masechet Menachot, page 29b. Mishemet Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa Badu Anshe Maaseh. Once Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa died, there ceased to be men of miraculous deeds. The Gemara in Masechet Tanit, page 25a, describes miracles performed by Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, which include the following 2. A. One Friday after sunset, Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa saw that his daughter was upset. She explained that she had mistakenly taken a jug of vinegar instead of a jug of oil, and she had filled the Shabbat lamp with vinegar. Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa said to her, my daughter, what does this matter to you? The one who commanded oil to burn can command vinegar to burn, and the lamp burned the entire Shabbat. And B, when neighbors of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa claimed that his goats were damaging their fields, he said, if my goats are causing the damage, may wolves devour them. But if not, may each goat return home in the evening with the wolf on its horns. That evening, every goat brought a wolf on its horns. Mishemet Rabbi Yossi Katnuta Pasku Chasidim. Once Rabbi Yossi Katnuta died, there ceased to be pious men. V'lama nikra shemo Katnuta shaya Katnutan shel Chasidim. And why was he called Katnuta, literally the little one? Because he was the least of the pious men. Pious men were gradually disappearing from the world. Of them, Rabbi Yossi was the last and the least. Mishemet Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai Batal Ziva Chochma. Once Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai died, the splendor of wisdom ceased, because he was exceptional in that besides knowing every part of the Torah, he also mastered other subjects. Knowledge of other topics gives splendor to the Torah in the eyes of the people. Mishemet Rabban Gamliel HaZaken Batal Kevod Torah. Once Rabban Gamliel the elder died, the glory of the Torah ceased, because people no longer stood while they learned. Until that time, people were strong, and so they would study Torah standing. But after Rabban Gamliel died, people became weaker and would study while seated. The honor of the Torah was therefore diminished. Now, although the Mishnah used the same phrase, the glory of the Torah ceased earlier, it means something different here. Umeta Taora uprishut, and purity and abstinence died. The Mishnah does not use the word batel, ceased, as it did before, because that word implies a complete stop. This cannot be said about purity and abstinence, because they were practiced by Tanim in later generations. The Mishnah's point is that when Rabban Gamliel died, he left no one alive who excelled in these qualities as he did. Mishemet Rabbi Ishmael ben Pavi Batal Ziva Keuna. Once Rabbi Shmuel ben Pavi died, the splendor of the Kunah ceased because he was a wealthy Kohen who hosted many Kohanim at his table. Mishemet Rabbi Batla Nava Virat Ched. Once Rabbi died, humility and fear of sin ceased. Rabbi is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, editor of the Mishnah. This line therefore could not have been Rabbi's version of the Mishnah. It was added by his students after his death, as the Rav explains. Now the next Tana lists matters that deteriorated after the destruction of the second temple. Some say that the Mishnah ends with the previous statement, once Rabbi died, humility and fear of sin ceased, and the passage that follows, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, etc., is a Braita that was added later. This appears to be the version used by the Rambam and the Rav, for they do not comment on the following passage. However, the next passage is included in the version of the Mishnah that appears in the Gemara. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair Omer, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair says, Mishecharav Bet HaMikdash, when the temple was destroyed, Boshu Chaverim Uvnei Chorin V'chafu Rosham. Torah scholars and free men, meaning people of pure ancestry who are not descended from slaves, mamzerim, and the like, have been put to shame and their faces are covered. They remain poor and weak, while arrogant mamzerim who are wealthy become strong and powerful. V'nidaldelu anshe ma'aseh v'gavu ba'alei zrua u'ba'alei lashon. Men of good deeds have become weak, while strong men and slanderers have become powerful. The strong men physically attack the righteous in public, and the slanderers verbally attack them in private. No one seeks, no one beseeches, and no one asks for the good of the Jewish people. No one seeks to benefit the Jewish people. No one beseeches God to have mercy upon them, and no one asks about another Jew's welfare. Upon whom then can we lean on? Only upon our Father in heaven. Rabbi Eliezer Agadol Omer, Rabbi Eliezer the Great says, Miyom Shechav Bet HaMikdash, from the day the temple was destroyed, the level of Torah scholarship started to decrease, such that the people of one level fell to the level below. Shero Chakimaya Lemeve Besafraya Kisafraya. Scholars began to be like school teachers. Besafraya Kechazanaya. School teachers like synagogue attendants. Vechazanaya Ke'amadara. Synagogue attendants like commoners. V'amadara Azlal Vinidaldela. And commoners became gradually weaker. Then Mivakesh, and no one seeks ways to stop their decline. Al mi yesh lishen al avinu shebashamayim. Upon whom then can we lean? Only upon our Father in heaven. The Mishnah describes the final period of the exile, which immediately precedes the arrival of the Mashiach. Bikvot Mashiach, in the period before the Mashiach comes, literally with the footsteps of the Mashiach. Now this refers to the final period of exile, when it is apparent the Mashiach will soon arrive, as though his approaching footsteps can already be heard. Chutzpah yisge, insolence will increase. V'yoker ya'amir, expenses will rise. Hagefen titen piriyah v'yayin biyoker, the vine will produce its fruit, yet wine will be expensive. There will be an increased demand for wine because everyone will attend drinking parties. This extra demand will cause the price of wine to go up. The people will turn to drink, the commentators explain, because they will be bitter and depressed. V'malchut te'afech leminut, the government that rules the world will be converted to heresy. In that era, all men, v'en tochecha, there shall be no rebuke, meaning no man will be able to rebuke another. In that era, all men will be sinful, so if someone were rebuked, he would respond, you are no better than I am. Bet vad yel iznut, the study hall, literally the meeting place. The meeting place, this is a hall where scholars meet and study Torah. Bet vad yel iznut, the study hall that was used for studying Torah will be used for harlotry. Now there will be so few Torah scholars at that time that their study halls will be empty. Because these halls were located outside town, so the students would not be distracted, and moral people would choose them for their decadent purposes, for their morality. V'galil yechera v'gavlan yishom, the Galil, the northern region of Eretz Yisrael, will be laid waste, and the Gavlan will become desolate. The Gavlan is the name of a place in northern Eretz Yisrael mentioned in the book of Yeshua, chapter 13, verse 5. Inhabitants of the border, all parts of Eretz Yisrael outside Jerusalem, will wander about from town to town in search of food, but will not be shown compassion. Now, because Jerusalem is so important, the rest of the country is described as the border of Jerusalem. The Chachmat Sofrim Tisrach, the wisdom of scribes, Torah scholars will decay. Their wisdom will be despised. V'yireh im aesu, those who fear sin will be despised. V'aemet tiyeh ne'ederet, truth will be absent. The generation will be so corrupt that people of truth will find it necessary to hide from the rest of the population. Narim pnei zkenim yalbinu, young people will make the faces of old people turn white from embarrassment. Zkenim yamdu mipnei ketanim, old people will stand before minors to give them honor. The young will insult the old, and yet the old will give honor to the young. Like it says, insolence, chutzpah yisge, insolence will increase. Ben menavel av, a son will deride his father. Bat kama b'imah kala b'chamotah. A daughter will rise against her mother to shame her. A daughter-in-law will rise against her mother-in-law. Oivei ish anshe beto. A man's enemies will be the members of his household. It says in Micha chapter 7 verse 6. Pnei adol ki pnei hakelev. The face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. Like a dog, they will have no shame. Habenenu mitbayesh me'aviv. A son will not be ashamed before his father. Upon whom then can we lean? Only upon our Father in heaven. Another teaching by Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair is cited. The following passage is certainly not part of the Mishnah, since it does not appear in any early versions of the Mishnah, including the one cited in the Gemara. Rather, it is quoted as the Braita in Avodah Zarah, page 20b. Masechet Avodah Zarah, page 20b. Now, it lists the spiritual levels that a person must climb in sequence in order to achieve his full spiritual potential. The famous work Mised Sharim, the path of the straight, by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzato is based on this Braita. It explains each level at length and teaches how it can be achieved. However, it lists the levels in a slightly different order. In any event, the Mishnah writes, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair Omer, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair says, Zirizud mivia lidei nikiyut, diligence in observing the laws leads to cleanliness from sin. One who is dariz, diligent, makes every effort to perform mitzvot promptly and properly. He also takes care to avoid any situation in which he might be tempted to sin. He is therefore clean from sin. Unikiyut mivelede ta'ora, cleanliness from sin leads to purity of thought. Once a person has succeeded at avoiding sin in practice, he will be able to avoid even thinking of sin. V'ta'ora mivelede prishut, purity of thought leads to abstinence, abstaining from permitted pleasure. Uprishut mivelede kedusha, abstinence leads to holiness, minimizing even necessary pleasure. He minimizes actions that give him pleasure, even if they are important for his physical well-being. For example, he fasts or he takes the vow of nizirut, which among other things prohibits him to drink wine. Holiness leads to humility. Once this world and its pleasures become unimportant in his eyes, he will be humbled, since he too is part of this world. Humility leads to fear of sin. The fear mentioned here is not fear of being punished for sinning, but fear of sin itself. When a person is humble and realizes how small he is compared to the Almighty, he understands that all the blessing in his life came from heaven. Through this knowledge, he develops love for God and becomes awed by his kindness. One who loves God will be appalled by sin, because sin displeases the one whom he loves. So it's not fear of being punished for sinning, it's fear of sin itself. Fear of sin leads to piety, going beyond the letter of the law. A chassid, the pious one, serves God not for his own benefit, but to please the Almighty. Therefore, he is not satisfied with obeying the basic law, but goes beyond the law in order to please his Creator to the best of his ability. The Chassidut mivia l'idei ruach hakodesh, piety leads to divine inspiration. After perfecting oneself in the ways of piety, one can work on achieving divine inspiration, which is a level of communication from God that is second only to prophecy. Ruach hakodesh mivia l'idei tchiat hametim. Divine inspiration leads to the resurrection of the dead. One who has reached the level of divine inspiration gains the ability to resurrect the dead, as are the prophets Eliyahu and Elisha. This person is so closely connected to God, the source of all life, that he can give life to the dead, as the Mised Sharim explains in chapter 26 in his book. Amen. And the resurrection of the dead will be brought about by Eliyahu the prophet, who was remembered for good. Amen. It is stated in Malachi chapter 3 verse 23, Behold, I send you Eliyahu the prophet before the coming of the great and awesome day of Hashem. This great and awesome day is the day when the dead will be resurrected. The verse tells us that God will send Eliyahu to resurrect the dead. And that is an abotai of Mishna Masechet Sotah, Hadrach Halan, Vadran Nalach, Mishna Masechet Sotah, Erev B'Shavei Chodesh Tov, and Erev Shabbat Shalom, Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen v'Amen.